Ambassador Helen Carter stared at the official document on her desk with complete confusion. The holographic seal of the Galactic Military Academy floated above the paper, spinning slowly in the artificial light of her office aboard the diplomatic. Station. She read the words again, hoping they would somehow change. Cadet Jake Carter has been accepted into the Advanced Combat Training Program at Proxima Station Military Academy. Report date, Standard Galactic Calendar 2387.156. Helen called. For her 12-year-old son, who was in the next room playing his favorite video game. Jake bounced into the office, his brown hair messy from lying on the floor while gaming. He wore his usual jeans and a t-shirt with a picture of an old Earth spaceship on it. Jake, did you apply to join the Galactic Military Academy? Helen asked, holding up the document. Jake's eyes went wide. What? No way. Can I? That would be so cool. He grabbed the paper and read it quickly. Mom, this is awesome. I get to go to space school with aliens. Helen rubbed her temples. She had been a diplomat for 15 years, but this was a new kind of problem. The Galactic Military Academy was not a place for children. It was where the galaxy's most dangerous species sent their strongest young warriors to train for elite military positions. The Academy accepted cadets between 16 and 25 years old. These were beings who had already proven themselves in combat or showed exceptional physical abilities. Jake was just a normal human boy who loved pizza and complained about doing his homework. Helen's colleague, Commander Lisa Brooks, knocked on the door and entered. Lisa was a tall woman with short black hair and the kind of serious expression that came from years of military service. I heard about Jake's acceptance letter, Lisa said, trying not to smile. I think I know what happened. Helen looked up. Please tell me you have an explanation for this mess. Lisa sat down and pulled out her tablet. Last week, we sent the annual diplomatic exchange list to the Academy. Jake's name was on it by mistake. The computer system probably flagged him as an adult military attach instead of a dependent child. So this is just a computer error? Helen asked. Pretty much, Lisa nodded. The Academy gets thousands of applications. Their system automatically processes candidates who meet basic requirements. Since Jake was listed as part of our diplomatic mission, the computer assumed he was qualified. Jake had been listening to every word, but I am qualified. I play strategy games all the time. I beat the hardest levels in Galaxy Warriors. Lisa laughed. Jake, this isn't a video game. The Academy trains real soldiers. These are aliens who can tear steel with their bare hands. Some of them have natural armor that can stop laser blasts. But I could learn. Jake insisted. And I want to see what alien technology looks like up close. Please, Mom? It would be the coolest thing ever. Helen looked at her son's excited face, and then at Lisa. This is ridiculous. I should contact the Academy and explain the mistake. Right away. Actually, Lisa said slowly, maybe we don't need to rush into that. What do you mean? Helen asked. Lisa leaned forward. Think about it. Jake shows up, takes the entrance tests, fails miserably, and gets sent home in a week. No harm done. And maybe it would be good for him to see what real military training looks like. It might help him appreciate his regular education more. Helen frowned. You want to send my 12-year-old son to an alien military academy as a joke? Not as a joke, Lisa said quickly. As a learning experience. The academy is safe. They have excellent medical facilities and strict rules about cadet safety. Jake would be surrounded by instructors who have trained thousands of young beings. And when he fails the physical tests, which he definitely will, he comes home with some great stories and a new appreciation for his regular school. Jake grabbed his mother's arm. Please, Mom? Dad always says I should learn about different cultures. What's more different than alien warriors? Helen thought about her husband, Dr. Peter Carter, who is currently studying alien plant life on the research deck of their ship. He was always encouraging Jake to be curious about the galaxy around him. But this seemed like curiosity taken too far. The Academy won't actually let him participate in real combat training, Lisa continued. Once they realize he's just a human child, they'll probably have him do basic exercises and maybe some classroom work. It's essentially a week-long field trip to the most advanced military facility in the galaxy. Helen looked at the acceptance letter again. Part of her knew this was a terrible idea, but another part of her was curious about what would happen. Jake had always been a smart boy, even if he wasn't particularly athletic. Maybe seeing real galactic military standards would motivate him to work harder in school. And if something goes wrong? Helen asked. The Academy has never had a training fatality, Lisa said. They're very careful about safety protocols. Plus, Jake would be there under diplomatic protection. If we wanted to pull him out at any time, we could. Jake bounced on his toes with excitement. I promise I'll be careful, Mom, and I'll do all my regular homework when I get back. Please? Helen sighed. She had a feeling she was going to regret this decision. But Jake's enthusiasm was hard to resist, and Lisa did have a point about the safety measures. Fine, Helen said finally, but only for 1 week. And if anything seems dangerous, you come home immediately. Jake cheered and hugged his mother. This is going to be the best week ever. 3 days later, Jake stood in the docking bay of Proxima Station, wearing the standard cadet uniform that had been sent to him. The gray and blue outfit was designed to fit various alien body types, so it looked a bit loose on his small human frame. The shuttle that would take him to the Academy was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was sleek and silver, with energy, patterns running along its hull. Through the windows, he could see other cadets already aboard. There was a massive four-armed creature with bone-like armor covering its shoulders and chest. Another being moved so fast it was hard to see clearly, appearing as a blue blur as it settled into its seat. A third cadet looked like it was made of living rock, with glowing eyes that pulsed with inner light. Jake suddenly felt very small and very human. For the first time since getting the acceptance letter, he wondered if this had been a good idea. But it was too late to change his mind now. He climbed aboard the shuttle and found an empty seat. The other cadets stared at him with curiosity, confusion, and in some cases, what looked like amusement. Jake tried to smile and wave, but most of them just looked away as the shuttle lifted off toward the Academy. Jake pressed his face to the window and watched the stars rush past. Whatever happened next, he was about to have the adventure of a lifetime. The shuttle landed with a soft bump on the Academy's main platform. Jake followed the other cadets out into the largest room he had ever seen. The ceiling stretched up so high that he couldn't see the top, and the walls were covered with screens, showing star maps and tactical displays. Standing in the center of the room was the most frightening creature Jake had ever encountered. It was nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and bone armor that looked like it had grown right out of its skin. Its face was angular and sharp, with glowing red eyes that seemed to look right through him. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," the creature said, in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. "I am Warlord Vexstar, your primary combat instructor. For the next 6 months, I will determine whether you are worthy to serve in the galactic military." Jake's stomach dropped. 6 months? He was only supposed to be here for a week. He looked around at the other cadets, hoping someone would speak up about the mistake, but they all stood perfectly still and silent. "Each of you represents the finest warriors your species has produced," Vexstar continued. "You have trained your entire lives for this moment. Those who succeed here will become officers in the galactic fleet. Those who fail will return home in shame. The warlord's red eyes stopped on Jake. Some of you may be wondering why there is a small human child among you. I am wondering the same thing. Humans are not known for their military prowess. They are soft, weak, and slow. This one looks like he should be playing with toys instead of training for battle. Jake felt his face turn red. Several of the alien cadets made sounds that might have been laughter. He wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. However, Maxstar said, the Academy has accepted him, so we will treat him like any other cadet. He will face the same tests, the same training, and the same standards. If he cannot keep up, he will be sent home quickly. The warlord turned to address the entire group. Your first test begins now. Physical assessment. Follow me. The cadets marched through a series of corridors lined with weapons displays and battle trophies. Jake had to walk quickly to keep up with the longer strides of his companions. They entered a gymnasium that was even larger than the landing bay. The four-armed cadet Jake had seen on the shuttle was named Zin. He was a Krillian, and when his turn came for the strength test, he easily lifted weights that would have crushed a human. With 2 arms, he bench-pressed 800 pounds while his other 2 arms operated complex computer displays. Impressive, Vexstar noted. Standard Krillian performance. Next came Kira, the blue-skinned cadet who moved so fast she was hard to see. She was from a species called the Zephyrians. When she ran through the obstacle course, she moved like lightning, completing jumps and climbs that seemed impossible. Acceptable speed, Vexstar said, though you could push harder. Rex, the rock-like cadet, was a Thakari. During the endurance test, instructors fired practice energy weapons at him while he advanced across a battlefield simulation. The energy blasts bounced off his natural armor without even slowing him down. Good defensive capability, Vexstar acknowledged. Then it was Jake's turn. He approached the weight bench with growing dread. The bar alone probably weighed more than he did. He managed to lift it a few inches before his arms gave out completely. Pathetic, Vexstar said. Next test. The obstacle course was a disaster. Jake could barely reach the first climbing wall, let alone get over it. The other cadets finished the course in minutes. It took Jake nearly an hour, and he had to ask for help twice. Embarrassing, Vexstar noted. Final test. The endurance test was even worse. The first practice energy blast knocked Jake flat on his back. The second one left him gasping for air. He couldn't even complete the course. This is what I expected from a human, Vexstar announced to the group. Weak, slow, and fragile. I am surprised his species has survived this long. Jake wanted to cry, but he refused to give the warlord the satisfaction. He struggled to his feet and waited for the next humiliation. But then something unexpected happened. The instructors brought out tactical simulation equipment. This was different from the physical tests. Instead of measuring strength or speed, it tested problem-solving and strategy. The first scenario was a simple combat situation. 5 enemy units were attacking a defended position. The cadets had to decide how to respond with limited resources. Zine immediately chose the most aggressive approach. He would charge the enemies with maximum firepower and overwhelm them with superior strength. It was a very Krillian solution, but it resulted in heavy casualties. Kira chose speed over power. She planned lightning-fast strikes to take out enemies before they could react. Her plan worked better than Zin's, but it relied entirely on her. Natural Advantages. Rex chose a defensive strategy. He would absorb enemy attacks while slowly advancing and wearing them down. It was effective, but took a very long time. When Jake's turn came, he studied the simulation carefully. He noticed things the others had missed. The enemy positions were near several fuel storage tanks. There was a river running behind their lines. The terrain had natural choke points that could be used to control enemy movement instead of attacking. Directly, Jake used the environment to his advantage. He found a way to cause explosions in the fuel tanks, forcing the enemies to retreat toward the river. Then he used the terrain to funnel them into a trap where they could be defeated with minimal casualties. The simulation ended with a perfect score. Jake had completed the mission faster than any of the other cadets, and without losing a single friendly unit. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Vexstar looked genuinely surprised. "Interesting approach," he said slowly. "Let us try another scenario." The second simulation was more complex. It involved coordinating multiple units across a large battlefield while responding to changing conditions. Again, Jake's solution was completely different from the others. Where the alien cadets relied on their natural advantages, Jake used patience and careful observation. He studied the enemy patterns, identified their weaknesses, and developed a strategy that turned their own strengths against them. The Academy's computer systems began recording unusual data. Jake's physical performance was at the bottom of the class, but his tactical scores were in the top 10%. More importantly, his stress response was completely different from the other species. When the simulations became more difficult and pressure increased, most cadets showed declining performance. Their heart rates increased, their decision-making became rushed, and they made more mistakes. Jake was the opposite. As the pressure increased, he became calmer and more focused. His solutions became more creative and effective. The computer systems had never recorded anything like it. Dr. Elin, the Academy's Zephyrian physiologist, began monitoring Jake's training with growing interest. The human stress response was fascinating. Instead of the fight or flight reaction common in most species, Jake seemed to enter a state of enhanced concentration under pressure. "This is most unusual," Dr. Elin told Vexstar after reviewing the data. "The human's tactical abilities are developing at an unprecedented rate. His physiological responses suggest he may be uniquely adapted for high-stress command situations." Vexstar studied the reports with growing confusion. Everything he knew about humans suggested they were weak and unsuited for military service. But Jake's performance in the tactical simulations was undeniable. "Continue monitoring him," Vexstar ordered. "Perhaps there is more to humans than we assumed." That night, Jake lay in his bunk in the cadet dormitory, surrounded by beings who could crush him without effort. He had performed terribly in the physical tests, but something about the tactical simulations felt natural to him. He thought about the video games he played back home, the strategy puzzles he enjoyed, and the way his mind worked when presented with complex problems. Maybe he wasn't strong like Zin or fast like Kira, but perhaps he had other abilities that could be useful. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake made a decision. He wasn't going to give up after one day. He would find a way to succeed at this academy, even if it meant working twice as hard as everyone else. The next morning would bring new challenges, but Jake was beginning to understand that there might be more than one way to be a warrior. 3 weeks had passed since Jake's arrival at the academy, and something remarkable was happening. Every morning, he woke up before dawn to run laps around the training facility. His legs burned and his lungs ached, but each day he could run a little farther than the day before. Dr. Elin watched Jake's progress with growing fascination. The human body was responding to training in ways that surprised even her advanced scientific understanding, while Jake would never match the raw power of a Krillian or the speed of a Zephyrian. His rate of improvement was unlike anything she had seen. "The human muscular system is remarkably adaptable," she explained to Vexstar during their weekly progress meeting. "His cardiovascular efficiency has improved by 30% in just 3 weeks. Most species show predictable improvement curves, but humans seem to adapt continuously." Vextar grunted, studying the data on his tablet. He is still the weakest cadet in the class, by a significant margin. Yes, but look at these endurance measurements. Dr. Elin pointed to a graph showing training session data. During yesterday's extended combat drill, every other cadet showed performance decline after 2 hours. Jake maintained consistent performance for 4 hours straight. This was true. Jake had discovered something that the alien cadets hadn't expected. While they were stronger and faster, they also tired more quickly. During long training sessions, Jake's steady pace allowed him to keep going when others needed rest. In weapons training, Jake faced new challenges. The standard Galactic. Military weapons were designed for beings with greater strength and different hand configurations. The energy rifles were too heavy for him to use effectively, and the targeting systems were calibrated for alien visual systems. Instructor Haddix, a 6-legged spider-like being, initially dismissed Jake's struggles as hopeless. Perhaps the human should focus on support roles, Haddix suggested. Communications or logistics might be more suitable. But Jake refused to give up. He spent extra hours in the weapons lab, studying the equipment and asking questions. He discovered that while he couldn't use the standard weapons effectively, he had unusual success with simpler, more basic tools during a training exercise. Using primitive kinetic weapons, Jake's performance shocked everyone. His accuracy with projectile weapons was exceptional, and his ability to improvise tools from available materials was remarkable. When other cadets struggled with equipment failures, Jake found ways to create effective weapons from spare parts and basic materials. This is an interesting development, Vextar admitted, watching Jake fashion a working slingshot from training equipment scraps. The human shows unusual creativity in weapon improvisation. The real breakthrough came during a month-long war. Game exercise on training Moon Alpha. The cadets were divided into teams and given limited resources to accomplish various military objectives. Jake's team initially struggled because his physical limitations seemed to hold them back. His teammates were frustrated. Zin, a powerful Krillian, complained loudly about being assigned to the weak humans team. Kira, the fast Zephyrian, suggested that Jake should stay at base camp while the others handled the real fighting. But Jake had been studying his teammates carefully. He understood their strengths and weaknesses better than they understood themselves. Zin was incredibly strong, but tended to charge into situations without thinking. Kira was amazingly fast, but often acted alone instead of coordinating with others. Rex was nearly indestructible, but moved slowly and had trouble with complex tactical situations. "I have an idea," Jake told his team during their first strategy meeting. "Instead of trying to do everything the same way as the other teams, let's use our different abilities to work together." Jake's plan was unlike anything the other teams were doing. Instead of trying to compete directly with their opponent's strengths, he developed strategies that used each team member's abilities in combination. Zin's strength was perfect for certain tasks, but only when supported by Kira's speed and Rex's defensive capabilities. The first few days of the war game were difficult. Jake's team lost several early engagements because they were still learning to work together. But as the days passed, something amazing began to happen. While the other teams stuck to predictable strategies based on their species' natural advantages, Jake's team became unpredictable. They used misdirection, complex timing, and innovative tactics that their opponents couldn't anticipate. During one memorable battle, Jake's team faced a force that outnumbered them 3-1. Instead of attacking directly, Jake developed a plan that used the terrain, weather conditions, and the enemy's own expectations against them. The battle lasted for 6 hours. The enemy team had superior numbers and firepower, but Jake's team never fought the battle their opponents expected. They used hit-and-run tactics, environmental advantages, and careful coordination to gradually wear down the larger force. When the dust settled, Jake's team had achieved a complete victory with minimal casualties. The other teams and instructors watched the battle recordings with amazement. No one had ever seen tactics like these before. "How did you know they would chase you into the canyon?" Kira asked Jake after the battle. "I watched them for 3 days," Jake replied. "They always respond to attacks the same way. They get angry and charge forward without thinking about traps or terrain, so I gave them something to chase." Dr. Elin studied the battle recordings with intense interest. "The human's tactical thinking is extraordinary," she told Vextar. "He processes information about enemy behavior, environmental factors, and resource limitations simultaneously. His brain seems designed for complex strategic analysis." Vextar was beginning to understand that he had seriously underestimated human capabilities. "What about his physical development?" "Remarkable," Dr. Ilin replied. "His strength has increased by 40%, his speed by 30%, and his endurance by over 50%. But more importantly, his coordination and tactical movement have improved dramatically. He's learning to use his smaller size and greater agility as advantages." This was true. Jake had discovered that being smaller and lighter than his opponents could be useful. He could move quietly, fit through spaces that larger beings couldn't navigate, and change direction quickly during combat. During close combat training, Jake initially struggled against opponents who were much stronger than him. But he began learning techniques that used his opponent's strength against them. He studied leverage, timing, and momentum to find ways to defeat much larger enemies. The other cadets began to notice Jake's improvements. Some, like Zin, were impressed by his determination. Others, like Kira, started asking him for tactical advice. Rex, who rarely spoke to anyone, began seeking out Jake's opinions on strategy. "You think differently than we do," Rex told Jake one evening after a particularly successful training exercise. "Your mind works in ways that make sense, but that we would never consider." Jake was pleased by the compliment, but he was also learning from his teammates. Zin's directness taught him about confidence and commitment. Kira's speed showed him the importance of quick decision-making. Rex's defensive approach demonstrated the value of patience and careful planning. As the weeks passed, Jake's position in the class rankings began to change. While his individual physical scores remained low, his tactical performance, leadership ratings, and adaptability measurements were climbing steadily. The Academy's computer systems flagged Jake's progress as anomalous and requiring further study. No cadet in the Academy's history had shown such dramatic improvement in so many areas. Simultaneously, Vextar found himself spending more time observing Jake's training sessions. The human's approach to problem-solving was unlike anything he had encountered in decades of military service. "Perhaps," Vextar said to Dr. Elin one day, "we have been too quick to judge this human. He may possess abilities that we do not fully understand." Dr. Elin nodded. "I believe we are witnessing the emergence of a new type of warrior, one who succeeds not through superior physical abilities, but through superior strategic thinking and adaptability." That night, Jake lay in his bunk thinking about how much had changed since his arrival. He was stronger, faster, and more confident than he had ever been. But more importantly, he was beginning to understand that there were many different ways to be a warrior. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Jake was no longer the frightened boy who had arrived at the Academy weeks ago. He was becoming something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before. By the 4th month, Jake had become a legend among the cadets. Stories of his tactical victories spread throughout the Academy, and younger cadets would stop their training to watch him work through combat simulations. What had started as curiosity about the small human had grown into genuine respect and admiration. The Academy's ranking system evaluated cadets across multiple areas: physical performance, tactical thinking, leadership ability, and adaptability. Jake's overall scores had climbed from dead last to the middle of the class, and they were still improving every week. Jake's morning runs had become a daily gathering. Other cadets would join him, not because they needed the exercise, but because they wanted to hear his thoughts on strategy and tactics. During these runs, Jake would discuss upcoming training exercises, analyze previous battles, and share insights about different approaches to military problems. The key is to think about what your enemy expects you to do, Jake explained to a group of cadets during one of these morning sessions. Then do something completely different. If they expect you to attack, defend. If they expect you to run, advance. If they expect you to fight alone, bring friends. Zin, who had become one of Jake's closest friends, laughed at this. You make it sound simple, but when I try to do what you do, it never works the same way. That's because you're thinking like a Krillian, Jake replied. You're strong and aggressive, so you should use those advantages. But you don't have to use them the way everyone expects you to. This was Jake's greatest discovery. Instead of trying to make everyone fight the same way, he had learned to help each being use their natural abilities in new and unexpected ways. His tactical innovations were spreading throughout the academy as other cadets adapted his ideas to their own species' strengths. Instructor Vextar had become an unlikely mentor to Jake, a massive Krillian warrior who had initially dismissed humans as weak and useless, now spent hours discussing strategy with the young human. Their conversations had become legendary among the staff. Your species thinks in patterns that we do not, Vextar told Jake during one of their weekly sessions. Where we see obstacles, you see opportunities. Where we see defeat, you see alternative paths to victory. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I think it's because humans have always been the weak ones. On Earth, we weren't the strongest or fastest or most dangerous. We had to be clever to survive. Maybe that's why we think about problems differently. Vextar studied Jake with his glowing red eyes. You have taught me more about warfare in 4 months than I learned in my previous 20 years of service. I am beginning to understand why the galaxy should not underestimate humanity. The Academy's most advanced combat simulations had been designed to challenge cadets with scenarios based on real galactic conflicts. These were situations where entire fleets had been destroyed, where famous generals had failed, where the best military minds in the galaxy had been defeated. Jake approached these simulations with the same methodical thinking he applied to everything else. He would study the historical records, analyze the decisions made by both sides, and look for patterns that others had missed. In one simulation, based on the Battle of Vega Prime, where a small defensive force had been overwhelmed by a much larger invasion fleet, Jake achieved something that shocked the entire instructional staff. Not only did he successfully defend the planet, but he managed to capture half of the attacking fleet in the process. How is this possible? Demanded General Corax, the Academy's commandant, who had come to observe the simulation personally. I fought in the actual Battle of Vega Prime. We lost 3/4 of our forces. How did this human child achieve victory where experienced admirals failed? Jake stood before the general, a small figure surrounded by towering alien officers. I noticed that the attacking fleet was following standard invasion protocols. They expected the defenders to fight a traditional battle. So I gave them what they expected at first, but then I changed the rules. Jake's strategy had been brilliant in its simplicity. He had used the planet's communication networks to feed false information to the attacking fleet, making them believe they were facing a much larger defensive force than actually existed. Then he had used the planet's industrial facilities to create decoy installations that drew the enemy into vulnerable positions. The final stroke of genius came when Jake used the planet's weather control systems to create an artificial storm that disabled the enemy's sensors. In the confusion, his much smaller force had captured enemy ships using boarding tactics that no one had expected. General Corix studied the simulation data with growing amazement. This strategy could revolutionize space warfare. The tactical principles you've demonstrated here could be applied to conflicts throughout the galaxy. Word of Jake's achievements began reaching the highest levels of galactic military command. Senior officers from various species requested copies of his training records and tactical analyses. Some wanted to study human military potential. Wow. Others hoped to incorporate Jake's innovations into their own forces. The Academy's computer systems had been tracking Jake's progress since his arrival, and the data was unprecedented. His improvement in physical capabilities was remarkable, but his development in tactical thinking and leadership was beyond anything in the Academy's records. Dr. Elin presented her findings to a gathering of the galaxy's top military scientists. The human exhibits learning patterns that suggest his species may be uniquely adapted for complex strategic thinking, she reported. His ability to process multiple variables simultaneously and adapt to changing conditions exceeds anything we have previously observed. The presentation caused a sensation throughout the galactic military establishment. For the first time, serious consideration was given to the possibility that humans might have significant military potential. Jake's influence on his fellow cadets was becoming increasingly obvious. Zin had learned to combine his natural aggression with strategic patience, making him far more effective in combat. Kira had developed team coordination skills that enhanced her natural speed. Rex had learned to use his defensive capabilities in creative ways that turned him into an offensive force. You have changed how we think about warfare, Kira told Jake, during a break between training sessions. Before you came here, we all fought the same way our species have always fought. Now we understand that there are many different ways to win. Jake's leadership style was unique among the cadets. He didn't try to dominate or intimidate others. Instead, he listened carefully to everyone's ideas, identified their strengths, and found ways to combine their abilities into something greater than the sum of its parts. During a complex multi-team exercise, Jake was given command of a mixed unit that included cadets from 6 different species. The exercise was designed to test leadership under pressure, and previous commanders had struggled to coordinate such diverse forces. Jake's approach was different from any previous cadet. Instead of trying to make everyone follow the same plan, he created a flexible strategy that allowed each species to contribute their unique abilities. He established clear communication protocols, set up backup plans for various contingencies, and maintained constant awareness of his team's strengths and limitations. The result was a flawless victory that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Jake's unit completed their objectives ahead of schedule, with 0 casualties and using fewer resources than had been allocated for the exercise. This human has natural leadership abilities that I have rarely seen, reported Colonel Thane, the Academy's chief tactical instructor. He inspires confidence in beings who are physically superior to him, and he achieves results that exceed what should be possible with the resources available. As Jake's reputation grew, he began receiving requests from younger cadets who wanted to learn from him. He established informal study groups where cadets could discuss tactics, share experiences, and learn from each other's perspectives. These sessions became some of the most valuable learning experiences at the Academy. Jake would present complex scenarios and encourage cadets to think creatively about solutions. He helped them understand that there was no single right answer to most military problems, but there were many wrong answers that could be avoided through careful thinking. The Academy's traditional training methods were being quietly revised to incorporate Jake's innovations. Instructors began emphasizing adaptability and creative thinking alongside physical prowess. The simulation programs were updated to include scenarios that required unconventional solutions. Jake's success was changing more than just military tactics. It was challenging fundamental assumptions about species capabilities and the nature of warfare itself. The small human boy who had arrived as a mistake was proving that in the complex realities of galactic conflict, intelligence and adaptability might be more valuable than raw physical power. As the 5th month of training began, Jake found himself in the unprecedented position of being seriously considered for the top graduate position. No one had expected this when he arrived, least of all Jake himself. But the evidence was becoming undeniable. The human was not just surviving at the galaxy's most elite military academy. He was excelling in ways that would reshape galactic military doctrine for years to come. The final examination week arrived with great ceremony. Representatives from military commands across the galaxy gathered at the academy to observe the testing of what was considered the most promising class of cadets in decades. The week-long examination would determine who would receive the coveted position of Class Prime, the top graduate who would be offered the most prestigious assignments in the galactic military. Jake stood with his fellow cadets in the great assembly hall, wearing the same uniform he had been given 6 months ago. The difference was that now it fit him perfectly. His shoulders had broadened, his posture had improved, and his confidence was evident in every movement. Ambassador Helen Carter sat in the diplomatic viewing area, barely able to believe what she was seeing. The nervous 12-year-old boy she had reluctantly allowed to attend the academy had been transformed into a young man who commanded respect from beings twice his size. The first day of testing focused on individual physical challenges. Jake knew this would be his most difficult area, but he was no longer the weak child who had arrived months ago. His strength had increased dramatically, his speed and agility had improved remarkably, and his endurance was now exceptional by any species standards. During the strength assessment, Jake still couldn't match Zin's raw power, but his performance was now respectable. More importantly, his technique was flawless. He had learned to use leverage, timing, and efficient movement to achieve results that pure strength alone could not accomplish. The speed trials showed similar improvement. Jake would never be as fast as Kira, but his movement was now precise and purposeful. He had developed an economy of motion that allowed him to accomplish complex tasks with minimal wasted energy. The endurance challenge was where Jake truly shined. The test required cadets to maintain combat effectiveness during a 12-hour continuous exercise. One by one, the other cadets began to show fatigue. Their performance declined as exhaustion set in. Jake, however, maintained steady performance throughout the entire test, finishing as strong as he had started. Remarkable, Dr. Elin whispered to General Corix as they watched the data streams. The human's endurance capabilities are beyond anything we predicted. His cardiovascular and muscular systems have adapted to stress in ways we're still trying to understand. The second day brought the tactical simulation challenges. This was where Jake's true abilities would be tested against the most complex scenarios the Academy could devise. The simulations were based on actual historical battles where brilliant commanders had achieved impossible victories. Against overwhelming odds, Jake approached each simulation with the methodical thinking that had become his trademark. He studied the initial conditions, analyzed the available resources, and identified patterns in enemy behavior. Then he developed strategies that turned conventional military wisdom on its head. In the simulation of the siege of Kethmorin, where a small garrison had held off a massive invasion for 3 months before finally falling, Jake achieved something unprecedented. Not only did he successfully defend the fortress, but he managed to break the siege and rid the attacking force in just 2 weeks. His strategy involved using the fortress's communication arrays to coordinate with resistance movements behind enemy lines, turning the siege into a complex multi-front campaign that the attacking force was not prepared to handle. "Impossible," muttered Admiral Vexter, a legendary Krillian commander who had come specifically to observe the tests. I studied that battle for years. There was no way to achieve victory with those resources. Jake's success continued through simulation after simulation. Each scenario that had stumped the galaxy's greatest military minds became another victory in his growing collection. His approaches were unconventional, innovative, and devastatingly effective. The third day tested leadership capabilities through live exercises with mixed species teams. Jake was given command of a unit that included cadets he had never worked with before, representing 8 different species with vastly different combat styles and cultural backgrounds. The exercise scenario was a complex rescue mission on a hostile planet. The team had to extract friendly personnel from an enemy-controlled city while avoiding civilian casualties and dealing with environmental hazards. Jake's leadership style impressed the observing officers immediately. He spent the first hour not planning the mission, but getting to know his team members. He learned about their individual strengths, their cultural perspectives, and their concerns about the mission. And he developed a plan that utilized each team member's unique abilities while accounting for their limitations. The Zephyrian scouts would provide reconnaissance. The Krillian warriors would handle direct confrontation if necessary. The Thakari defenders would secure extraction points. The human would coordinate everything from a mobile command position. The mission was executed flawlessly. Jake's team extracted all the friendly personnel ahead of schedule, encountered minimal enemy resistance, and suffered 0 casualties. The key was Jake's ability to adapt the plan in real time as conditions changed, always keeping his team coordinated and focused. "I have never seen such natural command ability in a cadet," reported Colonel Thane to the assembled observers. "This human instinctively understands how to bring out the best in every being under his command." The fourth day brought weapons and combat assessments. Jake had worked harder on this area than any other, knowing it was where his human limitations would be most apparent. But his training had paid off in unexpected ways. With energy weapons, Jake's performance was adequate but not exceptional. However, with kinetic weapons and improvised tools, he was extraordinary. His accuracy with projectile weapons was unmatched by any cadet in the class. His ability to create effective weapons from available materials was remarkable. During the combat simulation, Jake faced off against opponents who were stronger, faster, and more naturally equipped for fighting. But he had learned to use his smaller size, greater agility, and superior tactical thinking to overcome these disadvantages. Against Zin, Jake used the Krillian's own strength against him, employing leverage and momentum to achieve victory without ever trying to match his opponent's raw power. Against Kira, he used prediction and positioning to counter her speed advantage. Against Rex, he found the few vulnerable points in the Thakari's natural armor and exploited them with surgical precision. "The human fights like no warrior I have ever encountered," observed Warlord Vextar, who had become Jake's most unlikely supporter. "He has created entirely new approaches to personal combat that maximize human advantages while minimizing human weaknesses." The fifth and final day was the comprehensive command simulation. This was the ultimate test, where cadets were given control of entire fleets and armies in a massive strategic exercise. The scenario was based on the most complex military campaign in galactic history, a 3-way conflict that had lasted for years and changed the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Jake was assigned the position that historically had been considered the most difficult, commanding the smallest force while facing 2 larger, more advanced enemies who were also fighting each other. Previous attempts at this simulation had always ended in defeat for Jake's position. As the simulation began, Jake did something that surprised everyone. Instead of immediately planning military operations, he opened diplomatic channels with both enemy factions. While his opponents prepared for traditional warfare, Jake was gathering intelligence and looking for opportunities to exploit the complex political situation. The simulation that was expected to last for days was over in 18 hours. Jake had achieved total victory, not through superior firepower or brilliant tactics, but by understanding the motivations and fears of his enemies better than they understood themselves. He had convinced one faction that the other was planning to betray them, and positioned his own forces to take advantage of the resulting conflict. When the two enemy factions destroyed each other, Jake moved in to secure the strategic objectives with minimal casualties. The assembled military leaders watched in stunned silence as the simulation results were displayed. Jake had not just won the exercise. He had revolutionized the entire concept of strategic thinking. This human has demonstrated capabilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of warfare, General Corix announced to the assembly. His approaches to strategy, tactics, and leadership represent a paradigm shift in military thinking. When the final rankings were announced, the great assembly hall fell completely silent. Jake Carter, the human child who had enrolled as a diplomatic mistake 6 months earlier, had achieved the highest overall score in every category except raw physical strength. His combined ratings placed him at the top of his class. Cadet Jake Carter, General Corix announced, you have earned the position of Class Prime. You will graduate with the highest honors this academy can bestow. The applause that followed was thunderous. Every species in the assembly was cheering for the small human who had proven that determination, intelligence, and adaptability could triumph over any natural advantage. Ambassador Carter watched through tears of pride as her son received commendations from military leaders representing dozens of species. The boy who had wanted to see alien technology had become proof that